How did you feel about playing the creepy guy?
Well, he's not just a creepy guy, and that's really one of the biggest things to sort of feel about this role, I guess, is that we wanted to play with the audience a bit, and I certainly grew up loving those kind of movies that tease an audience and kind of take you for a ride a bit, and from the opening scenes, you feel like you're in good hands, and you're just going to kind of be taken where these crazy filmmakers want to take you, and. So we wanted a certain charm to the character that gets him in the door, that ingratiates himself to a number of the family members, but also have a creepy element to him, where the audience would keep asking the question of how they feel about him, and the hero villain, thing goes out the window really, and actually it's ultimately just about whether the character is entertaining, is what they're doing entertaining, and how far can we stretch those sympathies for a character that's seemingly doing some quite nasty things?
Yeah, when you were doing those nasty things to people, did you ever think, oh my gosh, are you okay?
There were a couple of times, yeah, when, without giving too much away, yeah, there's a couple of scenes with Micah where, I just wanted to check that she was
we
was
saw
right.
him.
Yeah, but no, we kept it pretty good humoured. Yeah.
So you're obviously British.
Obviously. I hope not too
Not sure if you knew. But your character is not, and I'm just curious, how did you, what sort of preparation did you do to get that accent so right? It sounded like a real Southerner.
Yeah, thank you. Accents and voices is something I've always loved doing, and it's been great in the last couple of years to start working that into some on-screen characters and play more Americans. It's a great privilege to get to come to another country and be embraced as a native, in those roles. The Kentucky was an interesting one. I think people do say that the Southern accent is perhaps a little easier for Brits than some of the other accents in this country. I don't know if that's true, but I certainly took to it well. I have a great friend who's from Kentucky who I got to read the Gettysburg Address to me, so that I had all the sort of sounds, the accents, and the consonants, vowels, and just little things like that. And so I loosely based it on him. David says he's from Louisville, Kentucky. I'm not sure if we believe him, but we wanted to sort of, we wanted to believe as much as came out of his mouth as possible, really. So if we took a Louisville accent, put it, through a little, a couple of different shapes, and also ran it through a slightly military dialect. I think anybody we know who's been through the military, even in England, this is true. Your native accent is modified to an extent, and that's very interesting as well. It kind of slightly blurs the background of this character, which we sort of wanted. We wanted to give him a slightly mysterious past.
How did you mentally prepare yourself to play somebody as off-kilter as this guy?
Well, I guess we wanted to root the character in at least one or two realities in order to then go to the crazy extremes that we go to. And I think one was that he's a very good soldier. He was, and that's why he was picked for the program in the first place. Very expedient, and also that he was a pretty nice guy, a charming guy, and excellent soldier, nice man. And certain elements of this conditioning, this programming, whatever he's been through, have removed certain key human elements that you and I would recognize. He's there to help the family, and I certainly believe what he says about Caleb and his bond to this friend, and going back to check on his family, see that they're okay, pass on a few messages. But the way he carries those things out, thank you, are there is something off about him, and I think Adam and I were keen to explore what happens when you put a character like that who's had the obvious emotional responses that you or I would hopefully have in those situations, take those out of the situation and roll this character in there and see what happens. And that's kind of where the fun of the film comes from, I think.
Did you have weapons training and fighting training? What was that like?
Very much so, yeah. I mean, the physical preparation was a big part of this for me, a big transformation, which is something I've always been kind of interested to explore. The psychology that's required, and particularly the discipline for the martial arts side of things. I was doing about 2 hours in the gym every day and 2 hours martial arts training in the same facility, and then we'd go to the gun range at lunchtime, and everything in between. So there was a lot of new challenges for me in this. But the martial arts discipline was particularly key in terms of just dialing in a certain kind of stillness, a certain kind of calm, and a certain way of thought that certain soldiers definitely have, which I think feeds into David.
What was in the Fireball?
What was in the Fireball?
Oh,
What is it?
I
It's
see.
cinnamon schnapps and Tabasco sauce. I think it's a good weapon. Yeah.
So you enjoy doing the action scenes, the scene in the bar, the house attack scene, those things?
Very much. Yeah. I mean, wouldn't you? No, what was one of the really delightful things about taking on this whole project really was meeting Adam and Simon, who clearly love movies. They're steeped in cinema, but also the fact that Adam grew up in Alabama, I grew up in Britain, and yet we watched almost exactly the same movies growing up. We were inundated with American action thrillers in the 80s and 90s in England. I really grew up on those things, the John Carpenter movies. Big Trouble in Little China with Kurt Russell was a big meeting point for me and Adam. As soon as if I meet anybody who likes that movie, I think it's a fairly high chance that we're going to get on. But with Adam, the list went on, and the Halloween movies, the Terminator movies. He made me go and rewatch Terminators 1 and 2 back to back, which I'd never done. I'd seen them both, but never in one sitting. I highly recommend it. But that sort of it was all part of it really. So that a sense of humour that comes from knowing those kind of films and knowing the fun that someone like Kurt Russell had with that role. Jack Burton is just Uma Thurman in Kill Bill was another one that came up. Just somebody who looks like they're having such a good time doing this film, and I don't know, just playing with the conventions of those kind of genres, playing with the audience's memory of those kind of genres as well.
Well, and The Guest has such a great combination of like the comedy elements and the really like dark, twisted, sort of sarcastic in a way, but then also really gruesome and goes there when you're not expecting it.
Yeah.
How did you guys find the right sort of combination and balance of that as for your performance?
Well, that was the line we wanted to dance, really. And I think, as soon as people know that they have permission to laugh at a film like this, then, that's a good thing. And we take audiences down a very kind of, a ridiculous path, really, in terms of going between those two things. But we really, we push it at points. And, without giving too much away, there's a certain death that happens towards the end of the movie where even if you've been going along with all of the carnage up until this point, you go, oh, come on, like even our most sort of loyal viewers are going, like, really? Oh my God, this is awful, and then we start to play on some of the guilt that you feel as an audience member for having enjoyed all of the violence up until this point, and that in itself, in the 80s and 90s and beyond, we've been exposed to a lot of very, very violent films, and we've enjoyed them, and why not? But there's a certain consideration of that fact in this movie. Why do we find that funny?
And what point do you think is the part where it kind of changes for funny? Because I think you're right. I think there's going to be people who are going to be like, "This is strange," and then they start laughing.
Well, I know people who've laughed at the title card.
Yeah, because it's like The Exorcist.
Right, which in itself is a sort of funny beat. You're like, oh, and then the next thing you see is a pumpkin head outside, and you're like, oh, it's Halloween, and it's not an out-and-out Halloween movie, and obviously it was set at Halloween for a reason, because that when something is set at Halloween, something's probably going to happen, and so we very quickly established that the movie's called The Guest. We see these feet, on the path. Who's this guy? Pumpkinhead. It's Halloween. This guy, Pumpkinhead. Something's going to happen, and then that for me is the kind of key that unlocks this crazy world, really. But I know people who who laugh at very, very different points. I know some people who haven't laughed at all, have just been scared witless. But I think once we get to the bar fight, and there's sort of much more of a synth-heavy soundtrack kicks in, you sort of know, you're in for a ride at that point. And it was something I really remember having watched You're Next, and I hadn't met Adam and Simon. But when I saw You're Next, I met Adam very soon after that. I just read The Guest and thought it was a hilarious script. But You're Next does a very similar thing in terms of you think you know this world, you think you know the kind of film you're watching, and they just sort of tip you up and then tip you back again and then tip you this way. And by the end, you realize you're in this ridiculous world that all of this carnage and this gore has essentially led up to AJ Bowen's character with this sort of middle-class aspiration for possibly a honeymoon in Paris, and all of these people have died in the most ridiculous ways, and this is the sort of the payoff. To me, just spoke of a deliciously dark sense of humour, which when I met Simon, the writer, I could see was not an accident. I mean, that is Simon's sense of humour, and so I think there was a lot of fun to be had with an action thriller genre, and sending someone in who is supposedly there to help, who ultimately wreaks destruction. Is both funny and also very pertinent to a lot of kind of global political situations that we were sort of loosely nodding at, I think.
One more
What-
question, sorry.
What kind of? I'm sorry. You,
Go ahead.
what kind of? I guess physical regimen or regime or however you say it. Did you have to go through? Because I mean, you were pretty built in that movie. Not that you're not now. I'm just saying.
Yeah, it's checks and balances.
I mean, it was.
No, to keep that up full time is
Right.
is hard work, and that really felt like a full time job at the time. And but a lot of it was nutrition. It was very dedicated sort of gym work. Almost bodybuilding at times. Those techniques in terms of specific muscles that would make David pop. But see, the martial arts was a big one for me. It's amazing how it physically transforms you. Changes the way you stand. But also has an effect on a lot of other things as well. It was very interesting to me to do that. Go on to your question quickly.
The music, how much of it did you, it was so important. Did you know, like when it turned to the techno, did you know that was there, or was that all put in later, or?
I mean, a lot of it was put in later, but actually we had the composer Steve Moore, who's a sort of electro genius, really. He was on set from the beginning. He came and went, but he was there to get a feel of the movie, also to play us a few little temp tracks he created. He owns a lot of original synthesizers from the 70s and 80s. I think none of his equipment is dated past 1990. And Adam, I'm sure, will tell you all this, but he owns every single synthesizer that John Carpenter used on the soundtrack of Halloween 3, which Adam was like, right, you've got the job, and also some of the music choices, the Love and Rockets song, for example, is quite obscure stuff, and I think that the producers were very, very confident that they'd be able to get it. So Adam almost had the soundtrack for me. And particularly that shot where he pans out of the window with Micah lying on the bed and then comes across and zooms in on David looking kind of crazy Terminator mode. He had that shot planned out with the tune from the day I met him, pretty much, which is a very cool thing to be walked through a shot like that with the direction. You kind of go, okay, I know the sort of world that this is going for. He wanted that sort of goth rock, slightly alternative feel to it. It's a great soundtrack. It's amazing. Yeah.
Thank you so
All
much.
right, guys. Very nice to meet you all.
Yeah.
Can we